The late afternoon sun, a dappled mosaic through the old maple's leaves, painted shifting designs on the cracked pavement beneath the park bench. Leo leaned back, the rough wood a familiar pressure against his shoulder blades, a comfortable ache. Beside him, Marcus's laughter boomed, a rich, full-bellied sound that invariably brought a smile to Leo's face. They sat knee to knee, a closeness forged by years of shared space and effortless companionship. "Remember Mrs. Henderson's toupee?" Marcus gasped, wiping a tear from his eye. "It flew off during the school play, right into Mr. Davies' tuba." Leo chuckled, the memory still vibrant. And Mr. Davies, utterly oblivious, kept playing with that thing vibrating on his bell. "Thing is right." Marcus slapped his thigh, a joyful crack. It looked like a startled badger trying to escape a brass cage. The image ignited another wave of laughter, leaving them breathless and lightheaded. This was their rhythm, honed over 2 decades, a perfectly synchronized dance of humor and shared history. Leo cherished these moments, the unvarnished joy of simply existing with his closest friend. A pervasive warmth spread through his chest, a comforting certainty that some bonds, some people, remained steadfast anchors in a constantly shifting world. Marcus, still grinning, suddenly straightened, his movements quick and decisive. His hand, warm and calloused, darted out, poking Leo sharply in the side. "Gotcha," he exclaimed, his voice boisterous, a triumphant glint in his eye. Leo yelped, a startled sound, jumping as his muscles instinctively tensed. The unexpected jab, though not truly painful, had momentarily stolen his breath. He automatically rubbed the spot, a phantom ache lingering. "Hey, what was that for?" he protested, though a smile already tugged at his lips. He knew Marcus, understood his playful spirit. It was simply Marcus being Marcus. "Just for being too comfortable," Marcus teased, his grin widening. "You looked about ready to nod off and start drooling on my shoulder." "As if," Leo scoffed, rolling his eyes good-naturedly. "I was merely appreciating the piece." Marcus merely shrugged, a mischievous spark still dancing in his eyes. He leaned back, mirroring Leo's previous posture, their knees remaining inches apart. The air between them, briefly energized by the sudden poke, swiftly settled back into its comfortable hum. Leo glanced at Marcus, who was now gazing out at the park, seemingly lost in thought. His profile was strong, the line of his jaw firm, a stray lock of dark hair falling across his forehead. Leo's gaze lingered for a moment longer than strictly necessary. Marcus was undeniably handsome, in a rugged, effortless way. Leo had long since accepted that his best friend occupied a specific, cherished compartment in his heart, distinctly separate from any romantic inclinations. Marcus was family, a brother in all but blood. Their bond was deep, unconditional, and utterly platonic. The playful poke, though it had made him jump, was simply part of their established dynamic. Marcus had always been physically expressive, a pat on the back, an arm slung over his shoulder, a shove in the ribs during a particularly competitive game of pool. It was just how Marcus operated, a nonverbal language of affection that Leo understood and appreciated. He knew it wasn't meant to be anything more, a harmless, friendly gesture. Leo dismissed the slight jolt of surprise he'd felt, the almost painful sharpness of the jab, as nothing more than an overreaction. He could be a little jumpy sometimes, that was all. A comfortable silence descended, broken only by the distant laughter of children on the playground and the rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. Leo shifted, settling back against the bench, letting the sun's warmth and the presence of his best friend wash over him. He felt a familiar sense of contentment, a deep-seated ease that only Marcus seemed to evoke. Their friendship was a steadfast anchor, a constant amidst life's sometimes turbulent seas. A simple poke, a fleeting moment of surprise, couldn't possibly disrupt that. It was just Marcus being himself. And that, Leo thought, was perfectly fine. Lingering touches. The familiar hum of the action movie provided a comfortable soundscape to Leo's Friday night ritual. Empty popcorn bowls, like forgotten monuments to a shared indulgence, dotted the coffee table. Leo's gaze was locked on the high-speed pursuit unfolding across neon-drenched streets. Next to him, Marcus shifted, his elbow grazing Leo's arm. It was a typical gesture of their easy camaraderie, but this time, Marcus's arm didn't immediately withdraw. Instead, it settled lightly against Leo's bicep, a subtle warmth permeating the worn fabric of his hoodie. Leo's breath hitched, almost imperceptibly. He remained motionless, eyes ostensibly on the screen, yet his awareness sharpened, every nerve tingling with the unexpected contact. The edges of his vision blurred. He waited, a silent countdown echoing in his mind. 1 second. 2. 3. Then, as abruptly as it had appeared, Marcus's arm lifted, retreating to the armrest. The spot where they'd touched felt suddenly cool, a phantom warmth clinging to Leo's skin. Crazy jump, right? Marcus's casual rumble sliced through the quiet. He gestured at the television, seemingly oblivious to the ripple he'd sent through Leo. His expression was open, alight with the thrill of the film. Yeah, Leo managed, his voice a little rougher than usual. He cleared his throat, consigning the fleeting moment of disquiet to the back of his thoughts. It was nothing, a mere lingering touch. Marcus was tactile, always had been. Just a friend, a best friend. A few days later, they found themselves at their favorite corner cafe, enveloped by the inviting scent of roasted beans and warm pastries. Marcus was animated, recounting a particularly absurd client interaction from work, his hands weaving through the air to punctuate his points. Leo listened, a faint smile playing on his lips as he sipped his latte. And then, Marcus leaned in conspiratorially, his voice dropping to a near whisper. He asked if I thought his cat understood Latin. Marcus's head was so close that Leo felt the delicate puff of his breath against his earlobe, an intimate warmth that sent a surprising shiver down his spine. The subtle, woodsy, clean scent of Marcus's aftershave filled Leo's senses. For a split second, Leo's world contracted to the small space between their heads, the cafe's quiet murmur fading to a distant hum. His gaze flickered to Marcus's mouth, close enough to trace the curve of his lips. Latin? Leo repeated, the word a little strained, pulling back slightly. He tried to inject humor into his tone, to make it sound like he was simply amused by the story, not unsettled by the proximity. Marcus chuckled, his head drawing back with a suddenness that left Leo with a strange sense of void. Yeah, Latin. Can you believe it? He shook his head, a wide grin spreading across his face, his eyes sparkling with mirth. The moment of intense closeness dissipated, replaced by the familiar boisterousness of his best friend. Leo forced a laugh, a hollow sound to his own ears. He took a long gulp of his latte, the warm liquid doing little to quell the unexpected flutter in his chest. The next weekend, A Saturday afternoon project had them grappling with a wobbly bookshelf in Leo's living room. Tools lay scattered across the rug, and the air was thick with the scent of sawdust and frustrated effort. Leo was crouched, his brow furrowed in concentration as he tried to align a stubborn bracket. "Hold it steady," Marcus instructed from behind him, his voice low and firm. Leo grunted in affirmation, bracing himself. Then a hand settled on his lower back, a firm, warm pressure that locked every muscle in Leo's body. It wasn't a casual brush, but a deliberate placement, strong and steady. The unexpected contact sent a jolt through Leo, a sudden, disorienting spark that stole his breath. He froze, the bracket forgotten, his mind scrambling to process the sensation. His lower back, a sensitive spot, was now acutely aware of Marcus's palm. He could feel the slight roughness of his callous skin through his shirt, the heat radiating from Marcus's hand. An unfamiliar tremor ran through him. He waited, muscles tensed, wondering if Marcus would speak, if he would acknowledge the touch. But there was only the quiet scrape of wood against wood as Marcus adjusted something above him. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the hand lifted. The warmth vanished, replaced by a sudden chill. Leo straightened slowly, turning to face Marcus, who was now expertly tightening a screw, his expression one of focused determination. "Got it," Marcus announced, stepping back, a triumphant gleam in his eyes. "Much better." Leo stared at him, his mind still reeling from the lingering touch. He swallowed hard, trying to dislodge the lump in his throat. "Right," he managed, his voice sounding oddly breathless. He wanted to ask, to question, to understand the subtle shifts he was noticing, the way these small physical interactions were beginning to feel different. But Marcus was already moving on, wiping sawdust from his hands, his easy smile back in place. There was no hint of anything unusual in his demeanor, no recognition of the tremors he'd inadvertently caused. Leo told himself it was nothing, just Marcus. But a tiny, persistent seed of confusion had begun to take root in his mind, growing quietly in the space between them. The pattern emerges. The next few days blurred into a peculiar rhythm for Leo, each interaction with Marcus layering another brick onto a wall of growing bewilderment. He found himself cataloging Marcus's movements, his touches, almost instinctively. It was like a new, unwelcome filter had been applied to his perception, highlighting every casual brush, every playful tap. There was the hand on his arm, a firm grip that lingered a beat too long as Marcus laughed at some shared absurdity, pulling Leo closer into their bubble of camaraderie before releasing him with a hearty clap on the shoulder. "Just kidding, man," Marcus would say, his smile wide and open, seemingly oblivious to the subtle jolt that ran through Leo. Then came the playful shoves, often when they were side by side, navigating crowded hallways or waiting in line for coffee. A hip check that was a little too forceful, a shoulder knock that sent a ripple of heat through Leo's side. "Watch it, clumsy," Marcus would tease, his eyes sparkling with mock indignation, as if Leo had been the instigator. Each time the same dismissive chuckle followed, a verbal broom sweeping away any potential for deeper meaning. Leo started to feel a blush creep up his neck more frequently, a telltale flush he hoped Marcus didn't notice. It wasn't a blush of embarrassment, not exactly. It was more a heat of confusion, a slow-burning ember of unease that settled in his gut. He found himself replaying these moments in his head, scrutinizing every nuance. Was he overthinking it? Was this just how Marcus was with everyone? He'd never noticed it before, but then again, he'd never looked for it before. One afternoon, as they walked through the quad, the sun warm on their faces, Marcus suddenly veered towards Leo, a mischievous glint in his eye. "Think you can outrun me, slowpoke?" he challenged, a grin splitting his face. Before Leo could even respond, Marcus made a move, a feigned lunge to trip him. Instinctively, Leo stumbled, and Marcus's hands shot out, catching him. But instead of a quick steadying and release, Marcus's hands wrapped firmly around Leo's waist, holding him close. Leo felt the solid warmth of Marcus's palms against his shirt, the pressure of his fingers against his lower back. For a long moment, they stood there, Marcus's face inches from his breath warm on Leo's cheek. The world seemed to narrow, the sounds of distant chatter and rustling leaves fading into a muffled hum. Leo's heart pounded a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Marcus's grip was strong, possessive almost, and Leo was acutely aware of the lean muscle beneath his touch. He could feel the slight shifting of Marcus's body against his, the subtle sway of their combined weight. It felt intimate. Too intimate for a "just kidding." Then, as abruptly as he'd grabbed him, Marcus released his hold, stepping back with a booming laugh. "Whoa there, almost took a tumble, didn't you?" he chortled, clapping Leo on the back, the sound jarringly loud in the sudden silence that had fallen over Leo's internal landscape. "You're such a klutz, man. Gotta watch where you're going." Leo could only manage a weak, forced laugh in return, his voice catching in his throat. The blush, this time, felt like a wildfire engulfing his entire face, a scorching heat that threatened to betray his internal turmoil. He averted his gaze, pretending to adjust the strap of his backpack, anything to avoid Marcus's eyes. "Yeah, guess so," Leo mumbled, the words feeling foreign and clumsy on his tongue. He could still feel the phantom warmth of Marcus's hands on his waist, a lingering imprint that prickled his skin. Marcus, seemingly oblivious, continued to chatter about their upcoming calculus assignment, his tone light and unburdened. Leo nodded along, feigning attention, but his mind was reeling. The pattern was undeniably there. The touch, the proximity, the lingering hold, always followed by the casual dismissal, the joke. It was like Marcus was testing a boundary, pushing just far enough to elicit a reaction, then retreating with a laugh, leaving Leo adrift in a sea of confusion. He tried to rationalize it. Boys were physical, right? Best friends roughhoused. But this felt different. It felt deliberate. And the blush, the unsettling flutter in his stomach, those were new. They were reactions he couldn't ignore, emotions that were beginning to demand an explanation, an understanding he was nowhere close to finding. The casualness felt less like genuine obliviousness and more like a carefully constructed facade, one that was beginning to crack, revealing something far more complicated beneath. A friend's advice. The aroma of dark roast and steamed milk, the familiar comfort of the daily grind, usually settled Leo. Today, it only amplified the agitated tremor in his chest. He watched Sarah navigate the short queue, her dark curls bobbing, a steady anchor in his often choppy world. When she finally reached their small, sun-dappled table, a mug steaming in her hands, her smile was as warm as always. "Rough week?" she queried, her eyes the deep green of moss after a spring rain, perceptively scanning his face. Leo offered a weak shrug, stirring his untouched latte. Something like that. He hesitated, tracing the rim of his mug. A dozen mental rehearsals of this conversation had left him feeling progressively more foolish. How to even begin articulating the bewildering pas de deux he and Marcus had been performing. "It's Marcus," he began, the name feeling ponderous on his tongue. He caught a flicker of recognition in Sarah's gaze, but she simply nodded, her expression unreadable. "He's been odd, even for him." Leo drew a slow breath, trying to corral the jumbled events of the past few days. "He keeps touching me. Not just a casual pat, it's more. He'll lean in too close when he talks, or his hand will land on my arm and linger. The other day he actually wrapped his arm around my waist, a full embrace, just to grab something behind me. Then he laughed it off. Just kidding, like it was nothing." A familiar flush crept up Leo's neck. "It's constant now. A nudge, a playful push, a hand on my knee under the table during cards. Always that stupid grin, always the 'just kidding' or 'don't be so sensitive, Leo.' But it's not a joke anymore, Sarah. It feels purposeful, like he's testing boundaries." He looked up, his voice barely a whisper. "Am I imagining things? Am I overthinking?" Sarah took a slow sip of her coffee, her gaze thoughtful. "No, Leo, I don't think you're imagining things. Marcus can be a lot. But this sounds different." She set her mug down gently. "Have you ever considered he might not just be testing your boundaries, but trying to figure out his own?" Leo stared, utterly bewildered. "His own? What do you mean?" "I mean," Sarah clarified, leaning forward slightly, her voice soft yet firm. "Marcus has always projected such certainty about who he is. What if these jokes aren't just about getting a rise out of you, but about him gauging his own reactions? To see how he feels when he's that close, when he initiates that kind of contact." The concept struck Leo with the force of an unexpected wave, upending his carefully constructed understanding. "No," he said, shaking his head almost violently. "No, Marcus is straight. He always has been. We've known each other forever. He talks about girls. He dates girls. He's normal." The word felt flimsy even as he uttered it. A flimsy shield against an idea too unsettling to truly consider. "What's normal, Leo?" Sarah countered gently. "And what if normal for Marcus is evolving? People change. Feelings can be confusing, especially when they defy what you've always believed about yourself. Maybe he's not oblivious. Maybe he's utterly terrified and just kidding is his retreat, his attempt to shove those feelings back down." Leo pushed his chair back slightly, a knot tightening in his stomach. The idea that Marcus, his boisterous, straightforward, undeniably straight best friend, might be grappling with feelings for him was so alien, so fundamentally disruptive to their carefully balanced dynamic that his mind immediately rejected it. It felt like an invasion of a private space he hadn't even known existed, a violation of the unspoken rules of their friendship. "That's crazy, Sarah," he insisted, his voice defensive even to his own ears. "You're overthinking it. He's just being Marcus. He's always been a bit of a boundary pusher, you know that. He probably just thinks it's funny, or he's trying to mess with me because he knows it gets a reaction." He forced a laugh, but it came out strained and hollow. "That's all it is." Sarah simply looked at him, her expression unwavering. Is it, Leo? Or is that just easier to believe? The question hung in the air between them, heavy and unspoken. Leo didn't respond. He couldn't. He wanted to dismiss her words, to laugh them off as a wild theory, but a tiny, insidious seed of doubt had been planted. It burrowed deep, refusing to be dislodged, silently blossoming into a quiet, unnerving dread. The coffee shop, once a refuge, now felt suffocating. He suddenly saw Marcus's lingering touches, his playful shoves, his prolonged embrace, not as isolated incidents, but as a series of breadcrumbs leading down a path he hadn't dared to imagine. And the thought, terrifying and exhilarating all at once, made his blush deepen to a furious crimson. The jokes continued, a relentless tide that eroded Leo's composure bit by bit. Sometimes Marcus would clap him on the shoulder, letting his palm linger, a phantom weight that hummed beneath Leo's shirt. Other times, it was a sudden arm around his waist, pulling him into a fleeting, too-tight embrace, always followed by that familiar, dismissive chuckle. "Lighten up, man. Just kidding." But the words no longer landed with their intended lightness. They felt like a flimsy excuse, a transparent shield against an invisible truth that Leo was increasingly desperate to uncover. One Tuesday evening, while they were huddled over a shared laptop, attempting to untangle a particularly stubborn coding error, Marcus leaned in close to point at the screen. His breath ghosted across Leo's ear, a warm current that sent an involuntary shiver down his spine. "See, the problem's right here," Marcus murmured, his finger hovering inches from Leo's, then brushing it as he traced a line on the monitor. Leo flinched, pulling back slightly. Marcus straightened, a wry smile playing on his lips. "What, you scared of a little debugging?" he teased, but his eyes, for a split second, held an unreadable quality. A depth Leo hadn't noticed before, a flicker of something intense and searching before the usual easygoing mask settled back into place. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, leaving Leo with a sense of dizzying confusion. Had he imagined it? Was he, as Sarah suggested, now actively looking for these signs, projecting meaning where there was none? The thought was almost as unsettling as the possibility that he wasn't. The following Friday, they found themselves at Ben's apartment for their weekly board game night, a tradition stretching back years. Tonight's selection was a complex strategy game involving intricate pieces and a sprawling map. The air was thick with the scent of stale pizza and the competitive hum of their friends. Leo, usually a fierce competitor, found his focus fractured. He kept glancing at Marcus, trying to decipher the subtle shifts in his expression, the unconscious gestures. Was he imagining the way Marcus's knee occasionally brushed his under the table? The way Marcus's gaze would sometimes snag on him, a fleeting, almost imperceptible pause before moving on. The anxiety in Leo's gut tightened, a persistent knot that refused to loosen. It was during a crucial turn, with the game hanging in the balance, that it happened. Leo was deliberating over a move, his finger poised over a small, intricately carved wooden piece. Marcus, seated beside him, leaned over, his arm brushing Leo's. "You should go for the port," Marcus advised, his voice low, a conspiratorial whisper. As Leo reached to move his piece, Marcus's hand, warm and firm, covered his. Not just a brush, not a graze, but a deliberate placement, his fingers completely encompassing Leo's, trapping the game piece between them. A sudden, electric silence descended, though no one else seemed to notice. The chatter from across the table continued, oblivious. Leo's breath hitched. He could feel the strong press of Marcus's palm, the slight roughness of his skin, the warmth seeping into his own. His heart began to pound, a frantic drumbeat against his ribs. It wasn't a casual touch, not an accidental brush. This was a deliberate hold, a moment suspended outside the flow of the game, outside the flow of their usual interactions. Time stretched, thick and syrupy. Marcus's thumb slowly, almost imperceptibly, stroked the back of Leo's hand. Leo's gaze snapped to Marcus's face. Marcus was looking at the game board, his expression unreadable, a slight frown of concentration on his brow. Yet his hand remained, a silent, insistent presence. Leo's mind raced, a chaotic blur of Sarah's words, his own burgeoning confusion, and a sudden sharp jolt of something he couldn't name. The awkwardness was a palpable entity, filling the space between them, thick enough to choke on. Leo's face felt hot. He could feel the blood rushing to his ears, a roaring in his head that drowned out the background noise of the game. He couldn't speak, couldn't move. His hand felt strangely disconnected from his body, a foreign object held captive. Finally, with a jolt that felt like an electric shock, Leo pulled his hand away. It was a swift, almost violent tug, breaking the connection. Marcus's hand lingered for a moment, suspended in the air above the game piece, before he slowly withdrew it. A faint flush rose on Marcus's cheeks, a subtle shift that only Leo seemed to register. Marcus cleared his throat. "Just thought that was your best move," he mumbled, his gaze fixed firmly on the board. Leo didn't respond. He picked up the game piece with his now trembling hand and placed it on the port. His earlier strategic thinking completely vanished, replaced by a desperate need to simply do something, anything, to break the suffocating tension. The knot in his stomach tightened, pulling so taut it felt like it might snap. He risked a glance at Marcus, but Marcus was already looking away, his usual easy smile back in place as he turned to banter with Ben. The unreadable look was gone, replaced by the familiar facade. But the memory of that brief, intense connection and the lingering warmth on his skin remained. A burning question mark seared into Leo's mind. Creating distance. The chess set sat between them, a silent sentinel on the coffee table. Leo found himself reaching for a pawn, not to move it, but to subtly adjust its position, nudging it closer to the center, creating a fraction more space between his knee and Marcus's. He leaned back into the sofa cushions, a casual posture that belied the tension coiling in his stomach. The air, usually easy and breathable around Marcus, had begun to feel thick, laden with unspoken things. He'd started doing this, almost unconsciously at first, then with increasing deliberation. If Marcus sat on the armrest of his chair, Leo would shift, picking up a book, perhaps, or fiddling with his phone. At the kitchen counter, he'd find an excuse to stand on the opposite side, ostensibly to reach for a specific mug or spice jar. The small, almost imperceptible movements were his defense, a whispered plea for boundaries and a friendship that felt increasingly boundless. Marcus, however, seemed to possess a radar for these minor withdrawals. If Leo angled away, Marcus would lean in, a casual comment about the game, an observation about the book Leo was pretending to read. His proximity, once a comforting presence, now felt like a physical weight, pressing in. A few nights later, during their weekly movie marathon, Leo chose the armchair farthest from the sofa. He'd even brought a blanket, an extra barrier he could wrap himself in, a cocoon of personal space. The film was a familiar action flick, full of explosions and quips, but Leo's attention kept drifting to Marcus on the sofa, a comfortable sprawl of limbs. When Marcus reached for the popcorn bowl, his arm brushed Leo's, a fleeting contact that sent an unexpected shiver through Leo. He flinched, a tiny, involuntary jerk of his shoulder, pulling his arm in tight. He immediately tried to cover it, reaching for his own handful of popcorn, hoping the quick movement would mask his reaction. He risked a glance at Marcus, whose eyes were fixed on the screen, a slight smile playing on his lips. Had he noticed? Leo couldn't tell. Marcus's face remained an unreadable mask of casual amusement. The next day, during their lunch break at work, Marcus walked up behind Leo as he was reaching into the fridge for his meal prep. Leo straightened, turning, and Marcus was closer than expected, his chest almost brushing Leo's. Leo stumbled back a step, bumping into the counter with a soft thud. "Whoa there, clumsy," Marcus chuckled, reaching out to steady him, his hand firm on Leo's elbow. The touch lingered, a low hum of contact that traveled up Leo's arm. Marcus's eyes, usually so open and guileless, held a flicker of something else, a knowing glint, a spark of intensity that made Leo's breath catch. Then it was gone, replaced by the familiar, easygoing expression. "You all right, mate? Nearly took you out." "Yeah, fine," Leo mumbled, pulling his elbow away, feigning an interest in the contents of his lunchbox. He felt a blush creeping up his neck, a heat that had nothing to do with embarrassment and everything to do with the unsettling current that had just passed between them. The physical distancing Leo attempted seemed only to fuel Marcus's need to bridge the gap. It started subtly, a hand on Leo's shoulder during a particularly funny moment, a nudge with his foot under the table. But then it escalated. They were in Marcus's living room, attempting to assemble a flat-pack bookshelf. Leo was wrestling with a particularly stubborn screw when Marcus, coming up behind him, suddenly wrapped his arms around Leo's waist in a mock headlock. "Having trouble there, little man?" Marcus's voice was playful, but his grip was surprisingly strong, holding Leo tight against him. Leo felt Marcus's chin rest on his shoulder, his breath warm against Leo's ear. It wasn't a quick, joking embrace. It was prolonged, unyielding. Leo could feel the solid breadth of Marcus's chest against his back, the hard line of his thigh against his own. "Marcus, come on," Leo grunted, trying to wriggle free, but Marcus held firm, a low rumble of laughter vibrating through his chest. "What, can't take a joke?" he teased. But there was an edge to his voice, a hint of something deeper. His embrace tightened for another beat before he finally released Leo, pushing him gently forward. Leo stumbled, regaining his balance, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He turned to face Marcus, who was now leaning against the wall, a wide, innocent grin plastered across his face. But Leo saw past the grin, to the depths of Marcus's eyes, where that same unreadable intensity flickered, a silent challenge. It was a look that asked, "What are you going to do about it?" Leo felt a wave of confusion, then a burgeoning anger wash over him. The jokes were no longer funny, and the distance he tried to create felt increasingly impossible to maintain. The prank that broke it. The familiar clink of ice, usually a prelude to an easy Friday evening, struck a discordant note tonight. 2 beers in, Leo felt a nervous thrum beneath his skin. The kind typically reserved for an awkward family dinner, not a casual catch-up with his best friend. Marcus, in stark contrast, seemed to revel in the charged atmosphere. He'd consistently leaned in closer than usual, his knee grazing Leo's under the coffee table, his hand lingering a beat too long on Leo's forearm when emphasizing a point. Each fleeting touch left an unsettling residue. Needing a reprieve from the subtle invasion of his personal space, Leo rose. "Another round?" His voice, a fraction too tight, barely masked the tremor. Marcus's eyes, bright with an unreadable intensity, tracked his every move. "Sure thing, Captain." In the kitchen, the fluorescent light hummed, stark and unforgiving, painting elongated shadows on the cool linoleum. Leo retrieved 2 fresh bottles, their condensation slick against his palm. As he turned, Marcus materialized, a half smile playing on his lips, effectively barring the exit. The air thickened, pressing in on Leo. He caught the faint scent of hops mingled with Marcus's natural musk, usually comforting, now stifling. "Something wrong?" Leo's voice was a mere whisper, a hollow attempt to ignore the palpable tension. Marcus offered no reply. Instead, he advanced, one slow step, then another, until Leo's back met the cool, unyielding counter. The bottles in Leo's hands felt cumbersome, almost a burden. Marcus's unblinking gaze burrowed into him, searching, consuming. This wasn't friendly. It was primal. Leo's breath hitched. His heart, a frantic bird, hammered against his ribs. He could feel the heat radiating from Marcus, the subtle rise and fall of his chest. Then, swift and deliberate, Marcus's hands came up, landing firmly on the counter, one on either side of Leo's head. Caged. Utterly and completely. The suddenness of it made Leo flinch, a sharp intake of breath. He felt a tremor in his own hands, threatening to send the beer bottles crashing. Marcus's unnervingly intense eyes were mere inches from his own, flecks of gold visible in their depths, faint stubble tracing his jawline. Silence stretched, a taut wire humming with impending tension. Every nerve ending in Leo's body screamed a warning. This wasn't a joke. This wasn't friendly. This was something else entirely. A wave of nausea, a dizzying rush of fear and confusion washed over him. He stood paralyzed, awaiting an explanation, an action. Marcus's gaze, almost unbearable, drilled into him, stripping away his composure layer by layer. An eternity seemed to pass, though it couldn't have been more than 10 seconds. Then, Marcus's lips twitched. A low chuckle rumbled in his chest, blossoming into a sharp, brittle laugh that echoed in the small kitchen. He pulled back, stepping away, his hands dropping to his sides. The sudden release of tension left Leo weak-kneed, his muscles screaming from the rigid stance he'd held. "You should see your face," Marcus gasped, wiping a tear of mirth from his eye. "Oh man, that was priceless. You actually thought." "Ha! Classic, Leo. Best prank ever." The word prank, dismissive and flippant, struck Leo like a physical blow, grating against his frayed nerves. The cumulative anxiety, discomfort, and creeping sense of violation coalesced into blinding rage. He stared at Marcus, seeing not his best friend, but a cruel, unfeeling stranger. "A prank?" Leo's voice was a raw rasp, barely recognizable. He slammed the beer bottles onto the counter, one tipped precariously before righting itself. "You think that was funny? You think any of this is funny?" He lunged, shoving Marcus hard in the chest. The unexpected force sent Marcus stumbling backward, his laughter dying, replaced by bewildered surprise. "What the hell, Leo?" Marcus stammered, rubbing his chest. "What the hell? What the hell, Leo?" Leo practically shrieked, his voice cracking with emotion. "That's what you say? After that? What is wrong with you, Marcus? What is wrong with you lately? Just tell me, what are you doing? Why are you doing this?" The questions poured out, a torrent of desperate confusion, years of unspoken frustrations finally bursting free. Hot tears stung his eyes, blurring Marcus's suddenly wide, uncomprehending face. The denial. The heavy quiet after Leo's outburst was a physical weight, pressing in, suffocating. Marcus, who had been a frozen tableau of bewilderment against the kitchen counter, slowly uncoiled. The easy amusement had vanished from his eyes, replaced by a steely glint Leo had never seen aimed his way. "What the hell, Leo?" Marcus's voice rumbled, dangerously low. "What was that for? It was just a joke, a stupid prank." Leo's chest still heaved, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. The cold knot of fear in his gut now wrestled with a searing, righteous indignation. "A joke?" he rasped, his voice raw. "You call that a joke? Pinning me? Touching me like that? That's not a joke, Marcus. That's harassment." Marcus scoffed, a short, sharp sound that scraped against Leo's frayed nerves. He pushed off the counter, closing the distance between them with 2 steps. Leo recoiled reflexively, a primal alarm flaring despite his anger. He loathed the lingering fear. "Harassment?" Marcus echoed, disbelief warring with rising offense. "Are you serious? We're best friends, Leo." "Best friends. I mess around all the time. This is what we do." "No," Leo countered, shaking his head, striving to steady his voice. The ground beneath him felt fluid, threatening to dissolve. "No, this isn't what we do. Not like this. Not anymore." He drew a deep breath, forcing himself to hold Marcus's gaze, refusing to yield. It started subtly, didn't it? The casual touches, the hands that lingered. I tried to ignore it, convinced myself it was just you being you. But it escalated. The arm around my waist, the hand on my thigh under the table, the way your gaze started to shift. Marcus's jaw tightened. "What are you even talking about? I've never done any of that." The outright denial hit Leo like a physical blow. His anger surged, hot and blinding. "Don't you dare lie to me, Marcus. Don't you dare pretend you don't know." He pointed a trembling finger. "Remember that night at the pub when you kept pressing your leg against mine? And then you laughed when I moved away? Or the time you accidentally brushed your hand against my crotch, handing me a beer? And the jokes about my sexuality? The comments about how I should just try it with you?" Marcus's expression, initially indignant, flickered with something Leo couldn't quite place. Surprise, perhaps, or a fleeting trace of guilt quickly suppressed. Then the anger returned, hardening his features. "You're fabricating things, Leo. You're twisting reality. Those were just friendly interactions. I'm a touchy person, you know that. I hug everyone. I joke with everyone." He ran a hand through his hair, his eyes narrowing. You're really overthinking this, man. You always do. You're conjuring something out of nothing. Nothing? Leo scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping him. Me being terrified, running from you, is nothing? Being cornered against the counter, your body pressed against mine, is nothing? You think that was friendly? Marcus's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. Look, I don't know what kind of bizarre fantasy you've cooked up, but this is absurd. I'm straight, Leo. You know that. I have a girlfriend, for crying out loud. Why would I do any of that stuff you're accusing me of? He threw his hands up in exasperation. This is insane. You've completely lost it. The words, sharp and dismissive, cut deep. A profound sense of betrayal washed over Leo, a cold dread seeping into his bones. Marcus wasn't merely denying his actions. He was denying Leo's experience, his feelings, his very sanity. It was an utter invalidation, a brutal rejection of everything Leo was trying to articulate. So I'm just imagining it all? Leo asked, his voice barely a whisper, the fight draining, replaced by a hollow ache. All the times you made me uncomfortable, all the times I felt violated, all the times I wondered what the hell was happening. That's all in my head? Marcus stared, his expression a blend of exasperation and something unreadable. Yes, Leo. Yes, it is. You're overreacting. You're making a mountain out of a molehill. It was just a bit of fun. You need to calm down. He took another step forward, his hand rising as if to clap Leo on the shoulder, a familiar gesture of casual comfort. Leo flinched back, a sharp, involuntary movement. The sight of Marcus's hand, once a symbol of their easy camaraderie, now filled him with revulsion. The gesture, once innocent, was tainted, a stark reminder of how his boundaries had insidiously eroded. Marcus's hand dropped, his eyes flashing with renewed anger. Fine, he bit out, his voice cold and flat. If you want to be like that, fine. But don't come crying to me when you realize you've blown everything out of proportion. Don't come crying to me when you realize you've just ruined our friendship over nothing. The confession. The silence that descended after Marcus's dismissal was a leaden shroud, stitched with disbelief and betrayal. A hollow ache resonated in Leo's chest, the ghost of a scream stillborn. His hands, still quivering, clenched into impotent fists. He felt as though he'd bared his soul, only for Marcus to desecrate it, dismissing his pain as a mere illusion. You think I'm inventing this? Leo's voice was a ragged breath, nearly swallowed by the frantic pulse thrumming in his ears. The accusation landed like a physical blow, more wounding than any of Marcus's inappropriate touches. It wasn't just his feelings being trivialized. It was his very perception of reality being warped, his sanity questioned. Marcus, however, stood unyielding, a bulwark of indignant denial. His jaw was set, eyes narrowed, reflecting Leo's anguish with a chilling fury. I think you're wildly exaggerating, Leo. You're twisting innocent gestures into something they absolutely are not. You're manufacturing harassment where none exists. Each word was a honed sliver, further shredding Leo's already fragile composure. This is preposterous. You're destroying everything. Do you realize that? The air crackled with unspoken recriminations, years of shared history dissolving beneath their feet. Leo stared at his best friend, now a stranger. The man who had once been his confidant, his anchor, was now an adversary, his features contorted into an unfamiliar mask of resentment. The realization slammed into Leo with the force of a physical impact. Marcus didn't merely deny his feelings, he consigned them to fiction, a defect within Leo's own mind. A cold certainty solidified in Leo's gut. He couldn't be friends with someone who actively subverted his experiences, who ridiculed his fear, who refused to acknowledge the pain he'd inflicted. The thought was terrifying, a precipice opening before him, yet also liberating in its stark veracity. "I can't," Leo declared, a shaky resolve entering his voice. His gaze met Marcus's defiant stare, unwavering. "I can't be friends with someone who believes I'm fabricating my own feelings. I can't be friends with someone who disregards my boundaries, who scoffs at my fear as overthinking. This isn't a jest, Marcus. This has been genuinely terrifying for me." He watched as Marcus's anger flickered, momentarily replaced by a flash of something akin to bewilderment, then quickly rehardening. "So that's it then," Marcus challenged, his voice laced with a bitter edge. "You're just going to jettison years of friendship over nothing?" "It's not nothing," Leo retorted, his voice escalating, a tremor running through him. The sheer injustice of it all, the audacity of Marcus's denial, ignited a fiery indignation he hadn't known he possessed. "It's everything. It's my comfort, my safety, my trust. And you've trampled it into the dirt." He took a deep, shuddering breath, his determination hardening within him. "I can't do this, Marcus. I can't be around you if you genuinely believe I'm inventing this. I deserve to feel secure with my friends. I deserve respect." He turned, the physical act of disengaging feeling monumental, a severance of an invisible bond that had tethered them for so long. The worn floorboards beneath his feet felt suddenly precarious, the air thick with unsaid words and shattered expectations. Each step away from Marcus was a deliberate act of self-preservation, a painful rending. He walked towards the door, the space between them widening with every measured stride. The silence behind him was suffocating, weighted with the unspoken finality of his decision. He didn't look back, unable to bear witnessing the further hardening of Marcus's face, the final nail in the coffin of their friendship. His hand closed around the doorknob, the cool metal a stark contrast to the burning in his chest. He inhaled again, preparing to step out into the crisp evening air, to leave behind the stifling confines of the apartment, the suffocating presence of Marcus's denial. He envisioned the quiet solitude of the street, the anonymity of passing cars, a balm to his raw nerves. Then, a sound, almost imperceptible, arrested him. It was a whisper, rough and broken, a sound that seemed to tear itself from Marcus's throat. It was not the angry, dismissive tone he'd grown accustomed to in the last few minutes. This was something else entirely. "Leo." The single word was a plea, an uncharacteristic vulnerability that stopped Leo in his tracks. He froze, his fingers still gripping the doorknob, his back still to Marcus. He didn't turn, afraid of what he would see, afraid of what he would hear, afraid that this was another ploy, another way to pull him back into the swirling confusion. The silence stretched, taut and agonizing, punctuated only by the frantic beat of Leo's own heart. He waited, dreading, yet also, inexplicably, hoping. Then the words came, a fractured confession that ripped through the quiet like a violent tear. Marcus's voice was barely a whisper, thick with an emotion Leo couldn't immediately decipher. A raw, aching sound that was utterly unlike anything he had ever heard from his friend. It was never a joke, Leo. None of it. I'm in love with you.